We're here at Barnes & Noble Union Square waiting for the Pierce Brown Iron Gold event to start.
Pierce Brown is the #1 New York Times bestselling author of Red Rising, Golden Sun, and Morning Star. His work has been published in 33 languages and 35 territories. In the epic next chapter of the Red Rising saga, Pierce continues to push the boundaries of one of the boldest series in science fiction. Joined in conversation this evening by his editor, Trisha Narwani. Please join me in welcoming Pierce Brown.
Well, I remember when I started off doing tours for Red Rising. I think it was the first time, 2014, in a series Galaxy in San Diego, and there were 12 people. So I go to this thing and I sit down, and I think that I'm going to, either have this table or be immediately recognized. But I had no idea what to expect. But I see 12 people sitting there. I walk in, and I kind of sit down because I don't know I'm supposed to go see the store manager, and I was kind of sheepish about these things. And so I sit down and I start talking to one of the guys next to me, and he asked me what I'm doing there. And so I said, I'm here for the signing. You know, I wasn't explicit. He says, oh, okay, cool, yeah. Well, I'm introducing this guy, but I'm not sure who he is. And so, yeah, then I'm like, open up the cover, and it's like weird GQ photo in the first one, and I'm like, ooh, like this. And he's like, oh God. So, thank you guys so much for coming. One of my favorite things has been to see the Red Rising fan community grow. Not just because, I mean, it's great for my ego, but the bigger part is seeing how the readers, how you guys reflect the values that are in the books, and how civil you are to one another, and how much it feels like a big family. And it's so fun getting to talk to all of you and seeing how three-dimensional because when I get your viewpoints on it, and when I talk about this world, it feels more three-dimensional to me than it ever has when I was writing at my parents' house, you know, without a real job. And it's amazing because all I wanted to do was go on an adventure, and it's so great to bring friends along. And that's what this feels like to me. So thank you for reading, and thank you for being here.
Many years after that first tour appearance, 4 novels later.
Many years, old haggard man now. I'm 30 in 4 days, guys. It's crazy.
Now you're a best-selling author and the head of Holler Army. You're basically king of the world. What compelled you to come back to this world, and what excited you most about Trinity?
Why, what a great question. I think that the Red Rising world to me when I was finishing up Morning Star, and I really did at the point, I thought that it was the conclusion. And then I was reflecting on the story when I was going through that final draft, first draft of Morning Star. And to me, the Red Rising world has never been a binary equation. It's never been about black and white. I mean, obviously you have this setup where you have these plucky band of rebels. Well, you know, kind of plucky, but mostly shit-talking goblins. But you have this plucky band of rebels against a tyrannical regime, right? And we've seen that story before. But what interests me about writing Red Rising and delving into it is seeing the shades of gray between the characters and between the themes and the overall mission itself. And it felt insincere to me concluding it with Morning Star, because I've always wanted to explore even more the gray areas of morality, and I wanted to see what would happen after basically it's like after what the second Death Star is destroyed, because that's the curious part, because you don't know, that's so seldom explored in these really archetypal stories. And it allowed me with Iron Gold to really start looking at the cost of this wonderful idea and the negative externalities of Eo's dream. And so with Iron Gold, I wanted to explore not just the themes of power vacuums being filled, not just the themes of how much or how evil are you willing to be to do something good, but really to explore the deconstruction of Darrow's myth. Because in Iron Gold, the reason I brought in more perspectives is because, one, I wanted to entertain myself, and if I'm just retreading the same path and redoing Darrow's story, I feel like that's something that would be hard for me to get excited about, because the way I write, I don't like outlines. In fact, I'm sorry, she's my editor, so she's constantly preaching the benefits of them. But it's an act of exploration, and if I'm not exploring, if I'm not figuring out things myself, I'm not discovering, then I don't get the catharsis that I want out of writing, and it's not as fun. And so these 4 POV characters, 3 of them are people whose lives, and everyone's life in this world there is affected, but 3 people that have been affected more than anyone else. And they represent different parts of the world. You have Lyria, a 16-year-old girl who is freed from the mines, freed from slavery, and she's the one who's supposed to benefit the most from this. But you see how her life and the promises that were made to her have not been kept. And her life is not what she expected. She's been pulled out of the mines and thrust into a society where she has no skill sets. She has no way to succeed. And I think in our own world, we've seen how deleterious that can be on an entire society, because it trickles down through the generations, this disenfranchisement. And what I wanted to explore through her is the disillusionment of an individual who thinks that they're getting everything they wanted, being freed from slavery, and then all of a sudden, the world is probably worse than when they were in the mines. And then the second character, Ephraim, is an old soldier who was part of the rising, and he's disillusioned by the violence that he's performed, disillusioned by his service and the lack of change that he's seen, because he still sees the plutocracy of wealth that accumulates in this society, and people that held the reins of power still very much do in Luna. And I wanted to explore the world through his eyes and see how he thought of Darrow. And then lastly, I wanted to explore Lysander's perspective, someone who had been actually wronged, someone whose family had been taken from him by someone we think of as a hero, and then start seeing how that shapes someone, especially someone who's, was his whole life he was brought up to think he was going to rule 18 billion people, and instead it's just him and Cassius. And he does not have any control over Cassius. And so exploring his identity being taken from him it's pleasant as an author, because I get to explore his own sense of identity. And that's what this book is. It's these 3 or 4 characters trying to find their identity in a world that has turned out differently than they all expected.
So we have 4 point of view characters instead of just one.
Mm-hmm.
For years I've been hearing you speak through Darrow's wits, but in reading Iron and Gold, it was incredible to hear these 3 new characters speak. What was it like developing those voices?
It was challenging mostly because, and surprising at the same time, because I expected Lyria to be the most difficult voice to handle, because I'm not now, nor ever have been, a 16-year-old girl, contrary to popular belief. But I found that her voice resonated the most when I started writing. It started just bursting off the page because of the righteous indignation that she does have. And she's been existing in a world where people have constantly preached something to her, and they've constantly given her all these, pretty speeches. Yet she's in the mud. And I think that reflects a lot of my view on our own world, because in our society, and trust me, I love the benefits of capitalism, but it comes with its own unique set of challenges. Because we live in a world where people are constantly trying to steal, for economic reasons or whatever, they're trying to steal your voice, your vote, your money, or not steal but take, so that they can make money or get in office or do whatever. And exploring through Lyria's head, she sees this bald face. She understands right off that people are trying to use her and use her people in order to back their own political agendas. And once I understood that, she just started, brimming with life, and I found her a real treat. The real trick was Lysander, because Lysander is about 14 times as intelligent as I am. How do you have a logical character, someone who's really intelligent, but also is going to make unintelligent decisions? And then you have to have, the pull between emotions, duty, intelligence, fear, and you have to pull them a certain way. And so with Lysander is very tricky, because I had to find that right balance. And so that he could be, he's been brought up by Cassius in a way for the last 10 years. And I'll not be too, a show of hands, how many of you have read Iron Gold? All right, so when we get to the Q&A section, be very suspicious if you see any of these people standing up to ask a question. I know, yeah, and prepare to throw your books at them if they do. So with Lysander, he's been brought up by Cassius, but the real question is, has he already been formed? Has he already been shaped by the 10 years he spent as Octavia's ward? Or is Cassius going to be the influence that really helps him go with a direction, a different direction? And so that pull with that intelligent of a character required a lot of rewriting. And so I found him to be the most difficult, but in the end the most rewarding in a way, mostly because I just got to parrot all the lines of my favorite philosophers, because he's obsessed with Marcus Aurelius, so I just got to be a huge nerd. Yeah, my mom gave me the Marcus Aurelius book, the Emperor's Handbook, when I was 12, and I was like, yeah, okay, Mom. And And then I really started reading. You know how it is when you're supposed to read books in high school, but a lot of times you're more interested in the books that you're not supposed to read. And so you're on Pink Monkey or SparkNotes. Pink Monkey was the really bad version of SparkNotes, kind of the illegitimate one. I still have that like attachment to the dial-up tone and then looking at Pink Monkey, so I didn't have to do my reading. And no wonder they kept me out of AP English. So yeah, I think I answered your question. I will wander, so do not be afraid.
How did becoming this godlike figure affect the young Helldiver that we met in the first book?
Well, that's why you got to read the book. I think one of my favorite sci-fi novels is Dune, and I'm sure a lot of you have read Dune. Yeah, it's a fantastic book. And the most compelling thing is in the sequels of Dune, you have Paul Muad'Dib, the main character, the protagonist. He started a interstellar jihad, at least that's what they call it in his book, and he's shocked and appalled in many ways by the things that are carried out in his name. And so I was a heavy influence when I started looking at Darrow and the things that have been carried out in his name and how it's looked at. But the real question is not necessarily how does it look from a macro perspective, but how does this affect the man? How does it affect a man who's already very rash, already a fan of executive action? And how can a man who's a fan of executive action, unilateral action, function within a society that is now a republic? And while unilateral action can often be very effective, it comes with its own problems, right? And I think that's, through history, you see the temptation of isolating power within one man, or one figure. And in Rome, they had their own problems with that before eventually slipping over, they had their designated dictators or designated tyrants. And then you saw them slowly slip towards unilateral action through one person as they transitioned away from republic to empire. And so the question that Darrow faces in this is, how does he doubt himself? How can he doubt himself when his gut has been the thing that has really pulled the Rising up? When his instincts and his actions have been the things that have saved everyone? So how do you quell that hubris? And at what point are you compromising the spirit of the rebellion, or compromising your own gut instinct by listening to politicians who aren't the ones winning the war? And that's the real question I wanted to address with Darrow's character, is how do you stay away from hubris? How do you have a clear head when you are looked at like a godlike figure? But to a lot of people, he's also a devil. And the sins of Darrow's past they weigh heavily on him throughout the books. And you see various castes or various interest groups who are harmed or at least offended by some of his actions. And you see that have a deleterious effect on the Rising itself.
Reading your work and looking for metaphors or parallels to the world we live in right now, how often are you influenced by contemporary world events as you're writing?
To a degree, but I think that, each one of you has had a starkly different experience in life than I have. So I think it's rather presumptuous of me to tell you how to think about a certain subject, particularly if I'm talking about my book reflecting, my far-flung space fantasy reflecting our world. And so I don't think it's my duty to tell you, how to solve the situations in our world, but I think it is the duty of authors to ask questions about their own time. And I think if they're not doing that, they're not performing the responsibility, which is simply to ask questions. Because I'm still figuring out, and I told you my favorite thing about writing these books is exploring. So I'm exploring a lot of these same themes. And what I really want to do is have this book reflect questions that are recycled through time. Because we have this temptation, and I think it's always been a temptation in the human race, to assume that our era is the end of history. To assume that every age that comes before has led to this moment. But that's bullshit, unless we are the last generation, in which case that's scary. But I think that it certainly shows and reflects some of the patterns that are happening in our world, but there have been populist movements throughout time. There have been demagogues throughout time. I focus a lot of the times when I'm actually writing the book I focus more on the Greek demagogue Demosthenes, who was antagonistic to Alexander when Alexander was trying to unite Greece under the Macedonian banner. And so that is more influential to me because I see that as representing a common trend line through history and a common, human pattern. And I think that it's more interesting to address common human patterns than present day. Because if I just address present day, then I think I'm limiting it. Because it's not then a story about humanity, it's more a story about the last 10 years. And you guys have lived the last 10 years, and it's not necessarily what you want to relive in book form. And so I hope that the book makes you ask more questions, because as I said before, we live in a society that's always trying to take your vote, take your money, take your time, and your time, because their time can, all those things can be translated to money. And so if we ask more questions, if you're able to find your own voice and see how you think about subjects, I think that's the duty of anyone in a democracy like ours. And so that's a question I ask my characters a lot. Well, it's funny because I started writing Darrow when I was 22, and Darrow was 16, so there was some commonality, you know. You probably have seen Darrow's angst. You know, I'd just been broken up with by my long-term girlfriend when I started writing Darrow. So I was like coming out of a place of, oh, it was me, you know. And then somehow, like, Darrow would be like a great extra member on Death Cab for Cutie. I know. Just give him that mop hairdo, you know, it'd be perfect. And so Darrow has kind of paralleled me to a degree in terms of how I've matured with him, because now Darrow's 33 in the story and I'm 29. And my worldview has changed, because it used to be very myopic and I would focus only on myself, as people are wont to do. And when I created Red Rising when I was 22, I was creating a character because I was disillusioned with my own life, my own place. Because you know when you're in college and they're teaching you like you're going to be the one shaping decisions, you know, like you're going to do economic policy on a global scale, or you're going to be doing marketing campaigns, but instead you get out of college and you just have an intimate relationship with a Xerox copy machine, you know? Or like you're really good at balancing coffee. Well, I was great at balancing coffee. I could do 2 trays like this and still get the door open, but mostly just because I got a good butt thrust. Something you didn't know about me, or maybe you did. But you know, the first book's really concentrated on that internal journey, and then this series more reflects the earlier question of how do I see these books fitting in with, was that me? Oh. Sorry, there was a beep. Well, that's bad form. It was Siri. See, they're invading our lives. And so this book now that I'm older, I started seeing, so I wrote the first book because I was disillusioned with myself and my place in the world, trying to find a path. And then I was able to find that path because I'd written 6 books. None of them had been accepted by agents or publishers. I've been rejected 130 times at the time. And so Red Rising was my last gasp. It was my thing where I thought I found my voice, yet I still got rejected by 25 agents. So I'm all excited, like, oh, now they'll be knocking on my door. And still the forum rejections came in. And it wasn't until 6 months later when I was an NBC page down in LA. And you guys have seen 30 Rock? Yeah, okay, so I was Kenneth. Yeah, Kenneth with worse skin. And my friends are jerks. They actually changed my name on their phone to Kenneth the Page. Yeah, awful. And so I had the peacock tie, the gray pantsuit and everything. And I got a call from an agent saying she wanted to represent me. And so of course I asked, you know, so how many other people do you represent? She says, actually you'd be my first client. And I'm just like, oh no. I'm like, well, how old are you? And she's like, I'm 23. I'm like, shit, I'm 23. And I don't respect 23-year-olds, but then I thought about it. I took a moment to pause, like I actually had other offers. You know, I said, I'll call you back. And so I'm just like sitting there drinking my coffee. Is it too long? I should probably wait another hour. I took a walk and I said, you know, I've thought about it. And it's intriguing, you know? And so I signed to that agent, and then less than a few months later, after working on the manuscript with her, and Hannah Bowman has been, you know, just a saint to me, helping to refine Red Rising to what it was, that I found a home at Random House in Del Rey. And so it was very quick after it happened. Now the book came out 2 years after that. Apparently there needed to be a little bit of work done on it. We disagree still? No. But, you know, that first journey was really about me finding a path. And I found my path through the books. I was able to find my identity. I was able to finally find a purpose, you know, and that's all I wanted. So I wrote Darrow because I wanted to have, he has that moral compass and that goal. And seldom is the world so simple. This is why I think fiction is so attractive. Seldom is the world so simple as to have an actual quest, an actual enemy. I mean, what I'd give for like a really good nemesis in my life, you know? Just someone who can be like, well, Adrius is out there and he might put me in his table, so I better work hard. And then these books, it's a bit of a transition because I found what I like to do. I found what I love doing and what I want to do the rest of my life. But as I finished the books, I started seeing the world around me being different than I thought it was going to be. I think they conditioned us to believe in the Martin Luther King quote that the arc of history bends toward justice. And I saw it a little bit differently or the world's shaking out a little bit differently, and I wanted to explore that. I wanted to explore the downsides of democracy. I wanted to explore the complications in life, because I'd seen more complications. I'd been disappointed more times. I'd had dreams that came crashing down. And I think you need those experiences to mature as a writer. You need those to mature as a person, as a partner. And that's why I started writing this book, and that's how Darrow's voice has changed, because he has more things tugging at him. At first he had nothing to lose. He had absolutely zero to lose. And now he has a family. He has a wife, a son, position, power, people that he represents. And so what is he willing to risk? What is he willing to sacrifice? And are those sacrifices themselves, are they going to lead to him risking more than he thought he was? And those are questions I really wanted to answer in the series. Mike didn't know, because I didn't give an outline, Mike didn't know about the end of Golden Sun. So I told him it was a wedding at the end. And so Mike's reading along, and he's like, I just don't see, this is kind of, I don't know what's going to happen here. It's like, where's the wedding happening? He's like, what the hell? And so he called me, and he's like, what? Yeah. And he's trying to use his inside voice because he's in the cubicle. Yeah, I think everyone overheard the conversation. When your editor sends you all cap text message, you know it's either like the end of your career or like they reached a twist in a Red Rising story.
But now you're hard at work on Dark Age.
Oh yeah, so okay. I'm making an outline,
Not on a napkin.
Well, you're just the taskmaster, Tricia. I have started doing an outline because I realized the inherent difficulty of 4 POVs, because the fun thing about Darrow is you're on a roller coaster ride with him and you get to explore. And to be honest, as complicated as it got with Darrow, it was always just a matter of going back over a linear timeline, but now you have 4 of them. And the key difficulty, and I'm sure any of you who are writers out there have seen this if you do multiple POVs, is syncing them up when they interact with each other. And so if you have guys interacting, 2 characters, but they meet at 30% done in one person's story and 70% in another person's, well, you have very different pacing problems. And so the first draft was pretty rough. Sorry. It was really a thing of discovery, and that's why our goal took 2 years. Obviously because I was laying the foundations of a new trilogy, and I was also seeing how the world changed in that 10 years, but mostly because I had the difficulty of doing 4 POVs. So for Dark Age, I've been outlining rigorously and learning from my friend Peter over there, who does the most intense outlines known to man. How long are your outlines usually, Peter?
200 pages.
200-page outlines. So I'm still a dilettante. I'm like 80 pages, and I'm like, well, good job, Pierce, But really, the reason I avoided outlines is mostly because I feel like if you talk about a book too much beforehand, if you're a writer, you'll understand this, and a creative in any capacity, or anyone starting a business or anything like that, if you talk about it too much beforehand, you rob yourself of the catharsis you'll feel when you're actually doing the task. So you're talking about it and you're feeling real good about yourself, but you ain't got shit done, And so you're just sitting there and you're talking about it feeling good, and then you realize, oh, I don't really want to get started on it because I already got the goody-goody feeling inside. And so with outlines, I always felt like I was already getting that feeling. I was already getting the catharsis. But then I realized that using an outline, you can explore in ways you can't in a real manuscript, because there's no feeling of claustrophobia. There's no feeling of, I've written 70,000 pages. If I change something here, I have to rewrite these 30,000 pages. Instead, you get to mix and match and just play, and I feel like a kid in a candy store now. So maybe I'm converted, or maybe Dark Age will be totally different, Tricia. It ends with a wedding.
Domes over the planet do. This is in reference to Iron Rage, and I'm assuming the planets are terraformed at this point?
Yeah, all the planets are terraformed. There are leftover domes from the para-terraforming, so it's called para-terraforming when they put them in a bubble. And so the bubbles initially existed so that they could terraform the world outside of it while they were already in living conditions inside. And so that was the early stages, and that was pre-conquering, so even 750 years ago. And on Mars, some of the domes, the para-terraforming domes, have been transitioned into bubble shields. And so they're planetary defenses a lot of times, or at least city defenses. But there are no big planetary shields in the Red Rising world because they just don't have the energy output, so that they're more covering 50 kilometers. And so they've transitioned them. Now, on Io, it's quite different. Io, most of the buildings are built into the mountain features, like the Basules Mons and other places. And they do that because of the difficulty of terraforming Io. It was deemed possible, but unfeasible economically. So they've actually basically carved out the huge cities in these 500 kilometer long mountain ranges. So each world is different, and the fun thing is it's kind of like what is it? Rick Steves' Odyssey. Rick Steves, anyone? The guy on the Travel Channel with that voice? Yeah. Now we're in Barcelona, and the key for Barcelona is the shrimp. That's just, sorry, that one was for me. And so it's fun to have kind of a travelogue and explore how certain places are different, and certain places are terraformed differently. For instance, Titan is completely terraformed. Ganymede is completely terraformed. However, on certain masses and certain asteroids, it's not feasible. It's also impossible to maintain certain aspects needed for people to be walking on the surface of the planet without suits. And a lot of this is why the rim is very different in its culture than the core, is because they don't have the abundance. They don't have the abundant energy. They don't have the abundant resources. And so you need that Spartan existence almost to maintain. And so there's also that idea of scarcity. So when I'm world building, I actually look at scarcity. I look at what someone doesn't have, what a place doesn't have, and then what people do to get that place. That's economics, that's politics, and that's warfare. And so all you have to do is start with scarcity, and then you explore outward from there. Oh, you're one of those. I will tell you in due time their names. But yes, they all do have names. But I don't keep notes, so I gotta remember what the names are. But seriously, I did have names for everyone, and the key is making sure they all make sense a lot of times, because there are so many names, so many families, and I have like this, a lot of times I'll write 5 pages of world building, and then Trisha or Michael come in with a battle axe and be like, that's great, that's amazing, we're using none of it. And so I'll have like this beautiful introduction, and they'll be like, no, let's just start here where Severo's peeing on this rock. So piss is apparently more interesting than my world building at times. And so you'll learn it, but I'm giving you the details in the way I want to present them. It's not an oversight. It's different with every editor. Mike Braff, it was really a privilege to work with him because he started as an editor and became one of my best friends. And because of that, but his temperament's very different. Like I think I can count on one hand the amount of nice things Mike has said to me about the books, which is fantastic because I need it. Because he looks like Gimli from Lord of the Rings. And when he's editing, he has the exact same temperament. He's kind of like grouchy, like, no, it's too much, too slow right here. Let's get to the killing. And so but I always knew how to distract him. I just put in like an obsidian who's kind of like a Viking, and he's like, Space Vikings! And so he'd be like totally fine. So it's kind of like the dog that sees something shiny and it's like, or squirrel, so Space Viking. It's great because when you have editors, and Trisha's always been a beta reader. She's always been the first person I think Mike gave the book to, so there's no continuity that's lost. But each editor is different. Trisha is much more complimentary, which I love. And so a lot of it is, I think editors, particularly in the Red Rising world, they're like BS editors. Like they find the times when I'm jumping the shark, and they say that doesn't make sense for that character, or they find the motivation that doesn't work. And that and the pacing is the strongest thing. Because I have a tendency to want to world build a lot, because I don't take notes, so I'm exploring and I'm getting really excited about the world while I'm writing, and then we'll find out it doesn't work because it slows it down too much. So the editors do a valuable job of truncating sometimes my superfluous talk and boiling down it to the essential elements. But Trisha, if you asked her the question, might have been entirely different.
We were talking earlier about how when you started Morningstar, you didn't originally envision this trilogy, and you started thinking about what happened after Death Star exploded in Star Wars. And I wonder, are there any other series, whether it's fiction, like a movie or a TV series or a book, where you want there to be a follow-up like Iron Gold?
Almost every one, to be honest. I think it's just because once when you're in the Millennium Falcon, you feel like you're at home. When you're at Hogwarts, you feel like you're home. And I miss home a lot of times. I miss my friends. Now the problem is, would the additions ruin the initial trilogy, or would they ruin the initial books? And so I think it's the burden on me, or the responsibility I have, is not to demean the actions of the first 3 books. He's a breaker. And what I want to do is have 3 characters who could exist in this world and give us a tour through it. So we can see the seedy underbelly, we can see the museums, we can see their opera houses, we can see their culture, we can get a better look at it and see into the cracks of their civilization. And so being able to do that, it makes the whole story feel richer, and I hope when you reread the original trilogy, you'll see the richness, because you'll realize that stuff existed already, we just didn't get to look at it, because Darrow's view was so myopic. And that's so fun as a writer to do, because it makes the world feel more real to me.
I'm a science teacher, and I'm always very amazed at your understanding and knowledge of science.
I am not.
I mean, what is it? Just research before the book, or do you have any sort of background in science?
Mostly research, mostly things that fascinate me. You know, you go down that 3 a.m. rabbit hole, and somehow you're looking at like Guatemalan prison conditions. I've learned so much. The worst is when you somehow get onto like a Jeffrey Dahmer page, and you're just like, I feel terrible, and you go to bed, you're just sad, you know. But the thing is, it really is, you know, you get into these 6-hour reading binges, and then you start pillaging all the essential information from it. And the best thing is, whenever I reach a point where I don't understand it, I'd be like, well, the technology is so sophisticated, it's like magic to the mere mortal nowadays. You know, you just wouldn't understand it. I had these guys from Armstrong Research Center talk to me about it, and they're like, dude, we love your books because they're just ridiculous science that we don't even have to explain. I'm like, me too.
Asking for a friend. So, we all
Friend. Yes, you read the Darrow and Severo fan fiction then, huh? Are you Hot Pink 22?
My fanfic is coming, don't worry.
Oh, all right, cool.
But so we all know about the infamous Hat of Death, you know, pouring out for pets.
I don't know if you guys all know about the Hat of Death. Should I tell the story first and then you finish your question? Okay, so the Hat of Death. I'd written 6 books, no one had read them, except for my mom, and that's another story that we don't have time for, but one day maybe, if you come back for Dark Age. I was at a point in the story where Darrow and the Jackal were finally meeting, and I knew I needed to kill a character because I was talking about how dangerous the Institute was, but at that time it had only been characters who died who either deserved it or were, you know, kind of like tragic bystanders, like Julian and Titus and people like that. And what I wanted is a character who didn't deserve it. And so I also wanted to demonstrate the capriciousness and dangerousness of the Jackal and of the themes of war. And so I put and I didn't know who to choose, so I wrote down every name on a piece of paper, except for Darrow and Mustang, and I put them in a hat. And then I drew out of the hat, and it was Pax's name. Maybe I should have done this after the signing. And I drew the name out, and I kind of like looked around my room, and I'm like, I can just put it back. And I was halfway to doing it, and then I realized I was feeling particularly deliciously sinister that night. No one's gonna read it anyway. And so then I kept it, killed Pax. And the funny thing is, I didn't know how well liked he would be. And he's also, unfortunately, one of the only characters I actually had a plan for. Ironically enough. You want to hear the plan?
Yes.
So Pax, not really, no. So Pax and Ragnar were supposed to be the Bash brothers in the next one. And if you're a Mighty Ducks fan like me, yeah, right? That's all I want to see. It wasn't Darrow going with the Valkyrie into the ship. He was behind Pax and Ragnar in my mind when he was taking Rogue's ship. And so that was crushing, but even worse, it gets worse. In the third book, he was going to find love with Avi. Don't worry, your tears make me stronger. And they were going to have one of the first new children, the mixed colored child, half pink, half obsidian, because it was going to be Mickey's gift to Avi after because he realized the years of torment he gave her. And unfortunately, none of that came to pass. So, continue your question now.
Okay, so we wanted to know, in interest of knowing like how the story might have otherwise unfolded, who else was in that hat?
Everyone except for Mustang and Darrow, who was in the room. So all the Howlers, Tactus, who else? Help me out. Severo was in the hat.
Could have been
Severo was in the hat, yeah. Well, I didn't know he'd be liked either. I was like, yeah, it was either the mutant child or like the ogre, you know? And so I'm glad I didn't pull Severo, because I don't think you guys would have kept reading. And in fact, some of you didn't in book 3. I had a person come up to me in the line and like throw her book at me, and she was in tears, and I was like, oh my God, what happened? And she's like, you killed him! I'm like, who'd I kill? And so you killed my baby. I'm like, I got your baby. And so I'm like, okay, take your book back, go out in the hallway and read it. She comes back in crying again. I'm like, oh gosh, she didn't read it. And she's like, thank you. So that was good.
Okay, so you wrote Lyria beautifully, and it was really good to connect with her.
No, keep going, keep going.
Will you, by any chance, give us like a novella or anything from Mustang's point of view?
Yeah.
Like, I would love to see her like as a mother, like a sovereign, as a woman, all these stages that she's had.
Interesting. No comment.
That's a yes.
Seriously.
Good to know.
We should probably end on a different question.
Maybe one more. Yes, in the way.
Do you have a soundtrack that you would advise people to read Red Rising trilogy?
So I'm thinking about putting together a Spotify soundtrack. So I have a song for every character, but I don't necessarily want to put those songs out there because they're so personal in a way. I'm like really transparent about my process, but for some reason that makes me feel weird because some of the songs are horribly weird, like you would not think, and I want that to taint your perspective of the character. But for instance, like Darrow, I'll tell you that one, his like kind of the inspiration for his soul, because I think music is still the best way to capture a soul, like in art form. And Darrow's was Johnny Cash's "Hurt," or his cover of Nine Inch Nails' song. So I always had that in my mind when I was writing Darrow. Also, the song I listen to a lot is "Sleeping at Last" Saturn. By Sleeping at Last, it's called Saturn. It's fantastic. But I think about putting out a playlist out there. Yeah.
Please do.
Okay. Interesting.